Today, we're doing a special episode where we deep dive into one of the best games I've ever played. It's a game that hasn't been forgotten, but it is a game where the past has been clouded by misunderstandings and misrepresentations. Today, we're going to die hard on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Gaming history is paved by the victors, both the big budget success and the surprise underdogs that changed the game. But for every game that hit its mark and found its audience, we have hundreds, even thousands, that never did. Whether a good idea poorly implemented, or a fantastic game that just never found its market, decades of gaming have fallen into obscurity. Here on Gaming Unearthed, we'll uncover the past, one forgotten pixel at a time.
Die Hard, like many retro games, was really popularized by the AVGN video. It became known as that bad game with a foot meter to a community that would never play it firsthand. This is actually where I first learned about the game. The rare person that actually plays Die Hard, they generally criticize it for being a worse action game compared to Contra or Mega Man, but that's like saying Forza is a worse racing game than Mario Kart. These are two different genres with very different intentions. Die Hard really isn't a shooter, it's a tactical shooter. It's intentionally slow-paced and very punishing in order to force the player to act in a more strategic way. You're not expected to win every fight, you're expected to pick your battles. And even calling it a tactical shooter is a bit misleading because there's more to it. It's like a cross between the highly tactical, lethal shooting of the original Rainbow Six and the open-ended narrative of Way of the Samurai. Both of these games came way later. And it's an asymmetrical strategy game that's slightly different every time you play. It's important to know that you and Hans are playing two different games. It's not like the average video game with a static level layout. Hans is holed up in the 30th floor with his army, and they're actively trying to counter your moves. Hans is moving his crooks around the board trying to track down John. You're outnumbered and outgunned, but you can ambush and use these quests to gain an advantage. While the overall flow of the game is the same every time, the items are randomized and the enemies move differently. Time is the single biggest factor working against you. All Hans needs to win is to escape the scene. Even stealing the money is just a story branch. What you're trying to do is move around the building, taking out as many enemy soldiers as you can while minimizing your own damage. When he unlocks the final floor, you go down there, face all of the soldiers, and defeat Hans himself. Succeed there and you win. But how you get there, that's all up to you. Die Hard has one unforgivable design choice, and it can be explained by AVGN's own quote.
I just can't figure this out. This is like one of those games that you need a manual or read somebody's walkthrough on the internet. But when it gets to that, it's like, who cares?
His entire video isn't based around the game being bad. It's about overwhelming difficulty in learning the game, getting frustrated, and rage quitting. As a designer, your job is to teach the player what to expect and how best to enjoy your game. I'll offer some leeway to the devs and say, read the manual, because memory limits meant they couldn't put everything in the game. But even with a manual, this game is a really rough start. This game has a reverse difficulty curve. It starts off highly difficult, but the better you play, the more side quests you complete, the more bad guys you pick off, the easier everything else becomes. I mean, it opens up with you outnumbered 2-1 against a guy with a machine gun, and reinforcements are on the way because Hans knows where you are. This is genuinely one of the hardest fights in the game because you're at such a disadvantage. You immediately suffer a lot of damage in this initial confrontation, assume the same threat for the next 38 enemies, immediately get overwhelmed, and you quit. The game never teaches you that you can use the sound of footsteps. It never teaches you that you can watch the doors open and close to see where they are around the hallways. It doesn't teach you to set traps, nor does it teach you to just run away when you're outnumbered. It's one thing not to hold the player's hand, but it's another one not to tell the player the basic things that you expect from them. Since the devs really didn't teach you how to play this game, that's what I'm going to do next. The first stage of the game is what I call the setup phase. During this phase, you're hopelessly outmatched, outnumbered, and you really want to do things to even the odds. Specifically, you need to survive the opening ambush, get your hands on a machine gun, and hopefully do a couple of side quests. It's during this early phase that you can get a hold of a radio and bring it to the roof where you call for police backup. While this won't help you during the setup phase, it will eventually. The second side quest is that you could take out the main computer to slow down the hacking. In order to do this, you need to find the rocket and the map items. Then you'll use the vents to get to the service elevator and you'll take that to the 4th floor. By using the rocket launcher on this floor, in the direction indicated on the map, you'll take out the main computer, buying yourself an additional 5 minutes to pick off the enemies. You needed to move fast and take risks for the setup phase, but now, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Your objective is to pick off the enemies while avoiding damage yourself. This requires you to use all of your senses. Listen closely because the audio cues in this game are top-notch. Early on, you can use the radio to listen in on Hans sending his troops from floor to floor. When he realizes that you're listening, he'll stop, but if you've called for police backup, Al will start calling in locations. Frequently, stop moving and listen for footsteps. Listen and watch for doors opening and closing. This will let you know exactly where they're located. Also, listen for the elevator. This will allow you to ambush the guy in a place where he can't dodge. When it comes to firing your gun, you want to fire the machine gun in short, controlled bursts. I recommend maybe 1 to 2 swings of the gun and start moving again. The accuracy is much higher up close, but so is the risk, so you need to balance your aggression to how good you are. If at any time you get surprised, it's because you screwed up. There's enough audio cues that you can know when there are enemies nearby. Always assume that they're right around the corner, peek, step back, and then pick the time to strike. And if you ever feel outgunned, run the hell away. In case you haven't noticed, time really is key here, and this is where the foot meter really comes into play. You can spend your foot meter to run, which allows you to dodge better, but as that meter goes slower, you stumble and slow down on all of your movements. More importantly though, the foot meter determines how long it takes to walk up and down floor to floor using the stairs. With a full meter, it's a minimal cost. But late game with an empty foot meter, you can spend an entire lock going up and down stairs. As the foot meter drops, instead of using the stairwells, you want to move to the elevators where there's just a fixed time from floor to floor. But there is a real question of whether you should run or walk. Running with a minimum meter is faster than walking with a full meter, so a lot of people recommend running all the time. But personally, I highly recommend that you conserve the meter so that you have a lot of control when it comes to dodging bullets. For a few more assorted tips, doors make for amazing cover, making these stairwell ideal. Step in, take a short burst, and then step right back out of that room. And speaking of doors, many doors are locked. You can open them by shooting off the lock. But there are also metal security doors which can only be opened using C4. Finally, be aware that Hans needs the detonator for his plan. If you steal that, he's going to be much more aggressive about sending enemies out, and he'll eventually send a mini-boss to recover it. He has double the health of a normal enemy and a machine gun. But it's nothing a well-placed C4 can't deal with. This entire video was dedicated to a game that buried its really good aspects under a really hard to break exterior. So what I'd like from all of you out there today is tell me one game that you've played that was very hard to get into. This can be something like Die Hard or Crusader Kings where there's a very large learning curve. Or it can be something like an MMO where the real fun doesn't start until you hit the level cap. Pretty much any game where you had to dig for your enjoyment, and then it turned out to be one of your favorites. You'll know when the showdown phase begins because when the robbers open the final lock, the music will change and the 30th floor will unlock. Collect your last minute supplies and make your way there. On this floor, you'll be attacked by every single surviving enemy at the same time. That's why the hunt phase mattered. You're trying to make this final battle easier. You have 3 choices for getting to the 30th floor. You can take the normal elevator, the express elevator, or be a suicidal idiot and use the roof. Don't use the roof. Seriously. Since we know you're going to use the roof anyways, things to be aware of. When you crash in through the window, immediately run straight upwards. You are both standing in glass that'll damage your feet, and you're standing next to an open window. If they hit you, you fall backwards immediately to your death, no matter how well prepared you were. Once you're down to the final crook, you can go meet Hans face to face. During this confrontation, you put down the machine gun and all of your special weapons, and you have to face him using a handgun. He takes several hits to kill, or you can shatter the window behind him and push him out. Take him out, and you've completed the game. And now we're going to take a few minutes to look at the way the branching storylines were. The first choice is really whether you call the police or not. This both impacts the amount of information you get while exploring and leads to different endings. In addition, a lot of the events depend on whether or not you have certain items. One important one is if you get the detonator, Hans ends up sending a mini-boss after you. If Hans can't get the detonators back, he can't blow the roof, which changes his endgame. And while none of these choices are really major game changers, it's cool to see how many different ways you can win or lose. Do you prevent the robbery? Do you face off against the FBI helicopter on the roof? Does Al save your life at the end? I think there's something like 7 endings in this game, and how often did you see that in this era? How cool is that? This entire video was dedicated to showing that some games are really hard to approach, but worth the effort. I learned this game through years and years of struggling without a manual. But what I'm hoping to do with this video is make it a lot easier for you guys to play, enjoy, and appreciate this game that I've grown to love.